I now declare this 61st meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in order. Colleagues, of course, today is the day that we formally receive the fall 2012 report of the Auditor General. It was tabled in the House 2 days ago. We've had an in-camera briefing on the day that it was actually tabled. This, however, is the formal public presentation of the fall report to this committee, who then receive it formally and decide going forward what action, if any, will be taken on any of the individual chapters. The Auditor General is, of course, here with us today. I would say to colleagues, I've asked the staff to do a little calculation, and so far, as long as we stay on the rails, excuse me, we should be able to accomplish our regular rotation. We have enough time built into our system. But if it looks to me like that is not going to be accomplished, then I'll bring it to your attention as soon as possible with a recommendation for adjustment to get us to the conclusion of the meeting. All this, of course, was precipitated by the fact that we just had a vote in the House and we weren't able to start at our usual time. Before I proceed, the Auditor General, are there any interventions vis-a-vis the way we're about to proceed?
Chair, we're doing our regular 7-minute rounds, is that correct?
5. I wish it was 7.
Okay, that's fine.
Unless you want to move an amendment to make it 7.
Actually, I think 5 makes more sense given the time constraints.
No, we'll be able to stay within our regular procedure. But I'm watching the clock. There is a point. I'm not going to focus on bringing to your attention the exact minute I'm looking at, but I have the calculations, and right now we should be able to do this. And as I mentioned, if for any reason we won't be able to do it in the usual way, I'll bring it to the attention of the committee as quickly as possible, make a recommendation, and we'll adjust to take us through in a fair fashion to the end of this meeting. I saw a hand, Mr. Byrne.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, since we are a little delayed today, if through you, if we could ask the Auditor General if he'd be prepared to come back on Tuesday to finish off the testimony, would be appreciated.
Well, we could certainly ask the Auditor General. The first thing, of course, would be a decision as to whether or not that's the will of the committee before any invitation is extended, and I'll take that towards the end of the meeting. Let's see how we do. If we get all our rotations in, the fact that the meeting was shortened, in my view, wouldn't necessitate any change in our procedure. If, however, we are not able to accomplish the regular rotation, as I mentioned earlier, I would be bringing it to your attention when I've concluded that we will not be able to make it, and we'll adjust at that time. And if we're short, Mr. Byrne, I would rule that your motion at that time would be in order, and I would receive it, assuming there is time to deal with it. But right now, I believe that given that we can complete the rotation in the usual fashion, even though it's a truncated meeting, I don't think there's a need for us to consider motions at this time. Fair? Very good. Any further interventions? Hearing none, we'll proceed. Mr. Ferguson, you have the floor, sir. If you'd introduce your delegation and present your report, please.
Merci. Monsieur le Président, j'ai le plaisir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to introduce to you the report that I tabled in the House last Tuesday.
General Jerome Berthollet and Wendy Loschuk, and also by Glenn Wheeler, the principal responsible for the audit of transfer payments to the aerospace sector. Le rapport contient les résultats de cette...
The report contains the results of that audit. In the first instance, we examined how Public Works and Government Services Canada, Health Canada, and Human Resources and Skills Development Canada plan their use of professional service contractors. We found that the departments plan their needs for employees and contractors separately. This hampers their ability to assess whether they have the best mix of employees and contractors to meet their objectives. Departments need to consider the full range of options that will enable them to most effectively deliver programs and services to Canadians.
Report about grant and contribution program reforms. In May 2008, the government announced an action plan to reform the administration of grant and contribution programs and streamline the administrative and reporting burden on recipients. Our audit looked at whether the government has adequately implemented this action plan. We found that the government has in fact focused its actions where they're most important. Treasury Board Secretariat has provided leadership and guidance to federal organizations to make the necessary changes, and these organizations have acted on most of their obligations. The government has made good progress in implementing the 2008 action plan. Now it needs to determine if the actions taken have made a difference for recipients. Let's turn now to our audit about what government is doing to help protect Canadian infrastructure against cyber threats. Critical infrastructure includes the power grid, banking and telephone systems, and the government's own information systems. The government has a leadership role to play in ensuring that information about threats is shared, and it has to improve the way it does this. This is important because officials are concerned that cyber threats are evolving faster than the government can keep pace. In 2001, the government committed to building partnerships with the owners and operators of critical infrastructure systems to share information and provide technical support. We found that 11 years later, those arrangements are not fully operational. Similarly, the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Centre has only been operating 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's not the 24/7 information hub it was designed to be in 2005. Furthermore, it's not being kept abreast of cybersecurity incidents in a timely manner. Since 2010, the government has made some progress in protecting its own systems and building partnerships to secure Canada's infrastructure. The government must now ensure that the sector networks are in place and working with the Cyber Incident Response Centre. We are also reporting on how National Defence and Veterans Affairs Canada managed selected programs, benefits and services to support eligible ill and injured Canadian Forces members and veterans in the transition to civilian life. There are many support programs, benefits and services in place to help ill and injured members of the military make the transition to civilian life. However, we found that understanding and accessing these supports is often complex, lengthy and challenging. The lack of clear information about programs and services, the complexity of eligibility criteria, and the dependence on paper-based systems are some of the difficulties for both clients and departmental staff. We also found inconsistencies in how individual cases are managed and problems sharing information between the two departments. As a result, Forces members and veterans did not always receive services and benefits in a timely manner or at all. National Defence and Veterans Affairs recognize they need to work together on solutions. I'm pleased they've accepted our recommendations, including to streamline their processes to make programs more accessible for ill and injured Forces members and veterans. Toujours au sujet de la défense nationale.
Always dealing with national defense, we examined how the department is managing its real property at 21 main bases across Canada. The Canadian Forces rely on real property such as buildings, airfields, and training facilities to carry out missions. These assets are valued at $22 billion. I'm concerned that the department is not yet adequately maintaining and renewing its assets. We found several weaknesses in the department's management practices. For example, the approval process for construction projects is cumbersome and slow. It takes an average of 6 years to approve projects over $5 million. We also found that national defense is behind in its spending targets for maintenance and repair and recapitalization. As such, weaknesses in national defense's management of real property could jeopardize the Canadian Forces' ability to carry out its missions. National defense recognizes it needs to improve and change its approach to managing real property. We also looked at programs that provide repayable assistance to support industrial research and development in Canada's aerospace sector. Since 2007, Industry Canada has authorized almost $1.2 billion in assistance to 23 Canadian aerospace companies through the Strategic Aerospace and Defense Initiative and the Bombardier C-Series program. Industry Canada has done a good job of managing most of the administrative aspects of the two transfer payment programs. However, we found that the department has been slow to measure progress against program objectives and report results publicly. Repayable support to the aerospace sector represents a significant investment on behalf of Canadians. Industry Canada has a responsibility to ensure that funding contributes to meeting the government's objectives in the area.
Term fiscal sustainability. We found that Finance Canada analyzes and considers the long-term fiscal impact of policy measures it recommends. However, at the time of the audit, the government had yet to make public its reports on long-term fiscal sustainability. Analysis that provides a long-term budgetary perspective would help parliamentarians and Canadians better understand the fiscal challenges facing the federal government. The Department has accepted our recommendations. Following the tabling of my report in Parliament, the Department issued its first long-term analysis for the federal government. We also recommended that the Department publish from time to time an analysis for all governments combined, federal, provincial and territorial, to give a total Canadian perspective. Mr. Chair, that concludes my opening statement. Nous serions heureux de répondre à vos questions.
Be delighted to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. And prior to starting our rotation, I would just welcome Mr. Harris, who is subbing in today. Welcome, sir. Hope you enjoy your time with us. And I will begin the rotation then with Mr. Saxton. You, sir, have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Auditor General and Assistant Auditors General, for being here today as witnesses. My first questions are regarding Chapter 2. In Chapter 2 of your report, you found that the government had adequately implemented the 2008 Government of Canada Action Plan to reform the administration of grants and contributions programs. Can you comment on how you came to this conclusion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In that audit, what we did was we looked at the fact that there had been a blue ribbon panel that had made some recommendations about changes to grant and contribution programs, and then the government had responded with an action plan. So we wanted to determine whether the steps in that action plan had in fact been completed. We found that they had, for the most part. The one area that we raised was the fact that the changes to the grants and contribution programs, one of the intended objectives of those changes was to lessen the burden on recipients, and we found that that really hasn't been measured yet. So there have been lots of good changes made, and changes that would lead one to expect that there may have been an impact on recipients, but there hasn't been a full effort yet to determine whether there is in fact less administrative burden on recipients.
Are there examples that you found particularly innovative in the ways that proposed by the implicated departments and agencies on their efforts to improve their grant and contribution program activities? And I'm not going to be able to remember the exact number, but in the chapter we do point out the fact that there was a situation where a number of programs were brought together, and it reduced reduced the number of application forms and that sort of thing that people had to fill out. So we did find, and we do have in the chapter, a couple of examples where it was notable the reduction of, at least looking at it from the department side, the reduction of the amount of effort that had to go in to some of those programs. Did you find that agencies and departments adequately consulted with their applicant and recipient communities to better serve Canadians within the grants and contributions process?
We did find that the agencies and departments involved were in fact consulting with their constituency, their stakeholders, and again, that was one of the good practices we found.
Thank you. And can you speak to the positive steps that the Secretariat took and continues to take in regards to providing leadership and ongoing support to ensure consistent implementation of new and more streamlined approaches to managing and administering the grant and contribution programs across the government?
In general, we did find that the Treasury Board Treasury Board Secretariat had fulfilled its responsibilities under the action plan, had taken leadership, had created opportunities for departments to get together to talk about how to improve the processes, how to streamline things, and in general, the Treasury Board Secretariat
took very much a leadership role in helping to make sure that those improvements were made. You know, at the departmental level or the organizational level, you know, again, we found very good progress. Perhaps there would have been some departments further ahead than others, but overall, from the Treasury Board Secretariat point of view, they certainly provided the leadership that was required in this in making these changes.
Okay, and finally, are you satisfied that all agencies and departments which you examined have taken appropriate steps in implementing the government action plan?
Certainly, in terms of implementation of the steps, you know, we were very satisfied with what we found. Again, the one area that provided us with concern was, you know, the goal of the exercise, or one of the goals of the exercise, was to reduce the administrative burden on recipients, and we think that that's something that should be studied. Because they're sometime in the next couple of years, they are doing a review of the overall implementation and going out and gathering information about whether there has in fact been a reduction on the burden on the recipients. I think is sort of the final thing that needs to be done in terms of finishing off these measures.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Saxton. And leading off for the official opposition today will be Mr. Harris. You, sir, have the floor.
How much time, sir?
5.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ferguson, for joining us today, and your officials. There's been a lot of talk in the last few days about your report with respect to cyber threats. The word progress seems to come up. The Prime Minister liked to use that word in the House. I noticed it appears several times in your report, usually qualified by something called limited or slow, and when you talk about 11 years of working, for example, to obtain cooperation and partnerships with infrastructure holders and the owners and operators, the lack of progress that we've seen, for example, in communicating with critical infrastructure owners and operators, could that be in any way related to the nature of cyber threats? You know, it seems to me that the excuse is that cyber threats keep changing, but surely communicating with the stakeholders, establishing the awareness, for example, of the center, making sure people know that reporting is a requirement, and in order to coordinate a response. These things have, seems to me, nothing to do with the changing nature of cyber threats, but rather have to do with government organization itself. Would you agree with that, or is there another explanation?
The chapter, the audit that we did was for the period starting 2001 up through 2011. And what we identified was that through the first part of that period, really 2001 through until, I guess, 2009, that progress was slow. Starting in 2010 and into 2011, we found that there was more progress in starting to build these things. So, and it's important that continue. So really, I guess what we found was with the partnerships, for example, you know, probably just before 2010, they built the partnership with the electrical and utility sector, and that partnership has been working well. But then with others, they need to build those partnerships. So in terms of sort of, you know, our assessment of progress through the first number of years, it was quite slow. We've seen better steps taken in the last couple of years. But with something like the Incident Response Center not operating around the clock and not getting access to all the information that it should have to play its role, that's certainly something that, from an organizational perspective, needs to be fixed so that it can do what it was intended to do.
Thank you. So I guess one of the phrases that comes to mind is attempting to play catch-up at this late date, having seen your report. One of the things that you emphasize throughout your report on cybersecurity is what you call the lack of action plans. In our opinion, you say on page 11 of the chapter, the lack of action plans since the 2001 commitments were announced has contributed to the overall lack of measurable progress, and even the 2010 cyber security strategy that you talk about does not yet have an action plan to guide its implementation. Then you go on to say the lack of a plan makes it difficult to determine whether progress is on schedule and whether its objectives have been met. So when we hear of announcements, and I think you refer to announcements being made and commitments being made from time to time over the years, does that have any impact? Like we've had an announcement, for example, made last week about an additional $155 million over the next 5 years. This is an announcement that would have come after the department had had an opportunity to review a draft of your report, I assume. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they would have had a draft of this report, so they would have been aware of what you were planning to say, and then they made this announcement last week. Again, at this point, I assume still in the absence of an action plan, so you can't tell even today whether or not these kinds of measures will result in achieving goals or objectives such as those you've pointed out here. Am I correct?
When we raised the question about action plans, really when we started the audit, one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to determine what were the steps, what were the things that that government had made had said that it was going to do in this area, and then we wanted to be able to measure progress against those. But what we found was that there weren't any itemized action plans that we could really go back and compare to assess their progress in terms of, well, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going to be in a few in X number of years. And then you've got something you can go back and assess whether they made the right amount of progress, but we didn't find those types of things. And certainly those types of action plans we feel are important in guiding any significant initiative. So it's one thing to say, well, here are our objectives, but in terms of the objectives, you then need to say, and here are the actions that need to take place to achieve those objectives, and here's the timeline in which we expect to do that, and then you can go back and then the government departments can use that as a guide for making sure that they're on track, and folks like us that come along and do audits can come along and then make an assessment to say, do they appear to be where they needed to be based on the original plans.
Thank you. Time has expired. Over to Mr. Cramp. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and certainly welcome once again to our distinguished visitors. We're happy to see you again. I've had the honor and the privilege of being on this committee for a number of years now, and I can tell you that your reports are important to Parliament, and we do take them in the vein and the context and the constructive nature in which they're proposed. So thank you for that. My writing, I just want to talk just for a second on the transition of the ill and injured military personnel. I have a little bit of a personal hobby horse, and my writing is right adjacent to CFP Trenton, the air transport capital of Canada, and as such, I have witnessed personally and talked to many of the families who either have experienced operational stress and or are subject to the fallout from that. And I was particularly pleased and to attend an announcement, matter of fact, with Minister McKay when we made the announcement as a government of the 6 operational stress centers opening in Canada, and the one of them right in Trenton. And so I can tell you that firsthand it was needed, absolutely. Does it solve all of our problems yet? No, but there was a step forward. I'm so impressed with what I have seen in the short period of time there. I know that in your evaluations you would have undergone a study of the operational stress centers. And I wonder, could you just give us some kind of an indication about what kind of a workload they're facing and how they're adapting?
When we did in fact visit two operational stress injury clinics, as stated in the report in paragraph 4.47, and really what our discussion with them was about how case managers are utilizing the centres, and whether case managers are referring some of these ill and injured members of the forces to the stress injury clinics, and we actually identified in the case of one clinic that they said they could in fact handle a greater volume than they were handling. Now that so there was something there that needs to be explored further. In fact, I guess sort of in that whole section of the report, part of what we are referring to is the fact that some of these ill and injured members, after having assessments done, it's noted that they need to have additional consultation, and that wasn't always happening. They weren't always actually being referred and getting that additional consultation. But in this particular case, it also indicates that, at least for this one centre, that in fact there was some opportunity for that centre to take up some more work if it needed to be done. So it wasn't necessarily just a resourcing issue.
Fine, thank you very much. And I know some of my colleagues might find it a little bit different for me to be agreeing with my colleague across the floor, Mr. Harris, when he stated that the cyber threats, of course, are just steadily evolving. And it's something that's going to require constant attention to detail, and that as the technology advances, so must our security advance, and they have to go hand in hand, and we recognize that fact. I can recall earlier on this committee a few years ago, we had a great challenge and it was put forward by the Auditor General that demonstrated the lack of interoperability between communications of various departments and or ministries, between D&D, police forces, etc., and a number of changes were made to that effect. And I noticed now, and back in 2011, our government introduced the Government IT Shared Services Initiative. Obviously, that it puts in place a sharing framework to facilitate the dialogue amongst all the shareholders, and it's critical that we have that dialogue, because if we don't have that dialogue, we can't identify the problems. So with cyber threat being the vast domain what it is, are you either confident or are you comfortable that this initiative at least is leading us in the right direction to dealing with this threat?
The audit really didn't look into that. The one thing that we noted in terms of government's own systems, though, was that after there was an attempted intrusion into government systems, that the government conducted or the departments involved conducted a lessons learned exercise to try and identify steps that could be taken to help improve the security of government's own systems. So that was a good exercise, and as you mentioned, sort of in the last couple of years, there has been some, I guess, changing of sort of roles and responsibilities. The one thing that we were concerned about was making sure that some of those roles and responsibilities line up with what policies say, because sometimes those things get a little out of sync if changes are made to organizationally sort of before policies, and that can cause some confusion. So there's still some catch-up that needs to happen in terms of making sure the roles and responsibilities are consistent between sort of the policies and what's happening on the ground.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cramp. We'll now move to Madame Blachette-Lamotte. You have the floor, ma'am.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I want to deal with Chapter 7, if you will allow me. and I'm going to seek out as short answers as possible because I only have 5 minutes. We speak about a long-term fiscal sustainability and that the government committed in making it public in 2007. It wasn't done. The Auditor General recommended that this be made public in 2011. It wasn't done either. Do you think that a report such as that one, which would contain an analysis of demographic changes, present and future, and the repercussions on the economic outlook and the long-term outlook for Canada, do you not think that this report would have enabled us to explain or justify changes to be made to old age security, for example? Wouldn't that have been a timely tool to justify the changes that are proposed for old age security? Thank you. Indeed, the government.
Thank you very much, Sherry, for to speak in French. But unfortunately, I think the committee is not the place to practice, and I think I deserve a quick and efficient answer as much as my colleagues. So is it possible to ask you to answer in English during my 5 minutes?
Sure.
And maybe practice another time? Thank you.
Very well. Mr. Ferguson?
Certainly the government did make a commitment to release this type of long-term fiscal sustainability information. And as we said in the chapter, we feel that it is important for parliamentarians to have access to that information about what, when you put all of those budget decisions together, what does that look like in terms of sort of the longer-term fiscal picture, not just sort of what's the impact on this year's budget, not just what's the impact on the 4-year political cycle, but what's the longer-term impact.
Merci. Ma question est vraiment...
Thank you very much, but my question was specific. Would that not have helped to justify changes as the changes brought for old age security? A report on long-term fiscal sustainability.
Well, again, what we felt, and the reason that we're saying that this information should be brought forward, is so that parliamentarians can use that information in understanding the budget decisions and the impact of those budget decisions.
Merci, Mr. Ferguson. Oui, dans les décisions.
Yes, thank you very much. In budgetary decisions, of course, there were announcements as to changes made on old age security. I asked for many times documents that would help me justify the changes for old age security in the budget. One of the MPs even told me that it was just a matter of changes, that the changes, whether they were appropriate or not. Would you agree to say that a long-term fiscal sustainability is really more than Infomat?
Fiscal sustainability is, it's a question of, when you look at all of the impact of all of those budget decisions, then, what does that look like to future generations?
That's pretty simple math, right?
Well, one thing to remember about fiscal sustainability is it's not predictions. Mm-hmm. Okay? It's taking sort of information and economic analysis as it exists now and extrapolating it into the future. It's complex. It requires economic models and a lot of different information. But also you have to remember that it isn't somebody trying to predict what the future is going to look like.
Thank you. I understand that. Thank you very much.
In 2009, a study was asked by the department, and the study never proved that there was a need to increase the old age security changes and access from 65 to 67. Other reports stated about the same thing. Now you're saying in the report that the department made analysis that would justify to a certain extent increasing this age for eligibility for old age security. Would the analysis by the department on old age security, were all these studies made public?
And we did identify that there was the 2009 sort of initial assessment about what the impact would be. And after that, what the department did was they went and they did a more in-depth analysis, as we described in the chapter. I think there are about 3 paragraphs there describing the different types of information that the department used
Sorry,
to...
Mr. Ferguson, I read the report. I just want to make sure that analysis you just talked about that the ministry did, is it public? Est-ce que ça a été rendu public, cette analyse faite par le ministère?
Was that analysis made public, the one done by the department?
It's, to the best of my knowledge, no, but you would have to ask the department that to be certain.
Time has expired. I know. Missy. Moving now to Mr. Shipley. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Auditor General. Chapter 5, recognizing that the responsibility is to look at the stewardship and management of the real property of DND. Just as a little background, I think for the viewers to understand that national defense real property includes 2.3 million hectares. That's not acres, that's hectares. Some 20,000 buildings and over 13,000 works and installations, and that reaches across from coast to coast in this great country and territories. In fact, the buildings themselves will go back to World War I, and if you include Quebec, the War of 1812, it goes to the Citadel in Quebec. I think the sheer scope and conditions of the infrastructure and real estate, likely for most people watching, is a little hard to envision because of the size of it. Considering those comments, was there any weight in terms of considering the magnitude of trying to manage a real property with the 2.3 million hectares, 20,000 buildings, 13,000 works in every province and territory across Canada? Is there any weight given to that consideration of it? Secondly, is there any other department that would compare in scope and diversity of the holdings?
Certainly the size of the portfolio of assets that National Defence has to manage is it's very large. It's a vast inventory of assets that has to be managed.
That's fine. I was just looking for a general comment in terms of recognition in terms of your report.
Okay, and in terms of how we looked at this, we were looking at it sort of from the bases, from the point of view of how the bases manage the assets. So, we were very much breaking it down to who's responsible to do that management. So it wasn't really a matter of having to weight anything.
Okay. And I think it's fair to say that there isn't any other department in the government of Canada or in Canada that compares in scope and diversity of those types of holdings.
To the best of my knowledge, that's a correct statement.
Okay. Since 2006, through 2006 to 2012, when we formed government in 2006, the budget was at $14 billion. It's now somewhere north of $20 billion. I want just for viewers to recognize that that type of budget responsibility to DND has increased during a time of fiscal constraint and a tough time in the economy, not only in Canada, but around the world. I think we acknowledge that through the 90s, there were significant budget cuts that happened in the national defense infrastructure. In fact, the reports say 43% of non-residential buildings and 61% we recognize are over 50 years old. In the early 2000s, they deteriorated by 6%, while the conditions of the works declined 16%. Is it fair to make some assumptions, maybe, or to know that when you have long-term neglect, that it does lead to long-term challenges of refurbishing those infrastructures, especially during economic constraints and times not only in Canada but around the world?
One of the things that that the department told us was that they had gone through a number of years where they hadn't put their focus on maintaining these types of assets, and
and therefore now they're trying to catch up. They've set targets for the amount of spending that needs to happen in these types of areas to try to make sure that the assets are maintained.
Yeah, in your recommendations, in your comments that you just made this morning, you mentioned that the National Defence recognizes and needs to improve and change the approach of managing its real property. In your report, you had 12 recommendations for National Defence regarding the property management. I'm just sort of wondering if you could help us. Would you be able to highlight the recommendations you believe to be sort of the most pressing, of the ones that need to be addressed as urgently as possible?
The recommendation that we feel certainly would be the most important would be in paragraph 5.95 that National Defence should complete the transformation of its real property business model that should include an integrated real property financial and human resource strategy. So something that looks at they need to fundamentally change the way that they are managing these types of assets to make sure that they can accomplish what needs to be accomplished.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now over to Mr. Byrne. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to focus in a little bit on Chapter 7, Long-Term Fiscal Sustainability and Finance Canada's actions. Mr. Ferguson, you basically, your message to Parliament is, in my opinion, fairly clear. Parliament needs better information before policy decisions, budgetary decisions are decided on through votes, and that information has not necessarily been forthcoming. Is that a fair characterization?
What we were looking at was the particular situation of that long-term fiscal sustainability information, so that sort of overall picture of the government's fiscal situation. That was what we were focusing in on, and we did that because, in fact, two things. Many other governments do it, and secondly, there was a commitment on behalf of the federal government to do that. So, and we felt that that information would be useful and helpful to parliamentarians.
Thank you. In addition to the Department of Finance, there are other institutions and agencies that do indeed provide advice, actuarial advice, on the implications of budgetary decisions. For example, the Office of the Chief Actuary provides advice to Parliament through its reports on the fiscal sustainability or the fiscal circumstance surrounding OAS and GIS through a triennial report. The 9th actuarial report on the OAS-GIS program was based on circumstances as of December 31st, 2009, but wasn't tabled until July 20th of 2011. Subsequent to that, the Office of the Chief Actuary, as is allowed it through legislation, it can produce supplementary reports. The 10th actuarial report, necessitated by Bill C-3, the budget, which increased certain GIS benefits for seniors, that bill was assented to by Parliament on June 26, 2011. But the chief actuarial reports, the 10th report concerning that, wasn't made available until November 4th, 2011, 3 months after laws had been passed. The 11th report, which was necessitated by the chief actuary on the OAS-GIS program, which was necessitated by changes to OAS-GIS through Bill C-38, which was made into law on June 29, 2012, that information wasn't given to the minister until July 18, 2012. Again, after these proposals, these budgetary proposals that affect the long-term sustainability of a very important program to the Government of Canada and to the Canadians, until well after the budget had been made into law. Is that acceptable?
It's not really something that I can comment at this point in time. It wasn't the focus of the audit, sort of all of those different types of reports that you're referring to. What we were looking at was the analysis that the Department of Finance does itself in terms of bringing that type of information forward. So we didn't do any audit work in terms of when those types of other
reports would be available, or what should be done with them.
If you were to give a message to Parliament, though, about this, since we are spending resources through the Office of the Chief Actuary to provide actuarial advice and to table that actuarial advice on the fiscal stability of the OAS-GIS program, the Department of Finance appears to be doing something else on their own and keeping that matter internal, whereas the Chief Actuary, the Office of the Chief Actuary has an obligation to actually table that information. Would it be your opinion that it would be helpful that Parliament not only utilize the Office of the Chief Actuary in assessing budgetary matters, but that information be made available before the matters are voted upon in Parliament? Would you hold that opinion?
Again, Mr. Chair, my only response is we didn't do an audit on the Office of the Chief Actuary, so I can't comment on that.
Then, having done an audit on the Department of Finance and their procedures, are you suggesting in any way that Parliament should have that information from the Department of Finance before we vote on budgetary matters?
Certainly our recommendation was that the long-term fiscal sustainability information should be made public as part of that the budget exercise, so people understand what's the impact on the long-term situation of the federal government, and people understand that at the time that and parliamentarians understand that at the time the budget's coming down.
Time has expired.
Shoot.
I know. Mr. Aspin, you now have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome to our committee. I'm going to focus my questions on Chapter 6, which deals with the aerospace sector. And I note in that chapter that it's concluded that over the past 3 years that Industry Canada has improved the way it collects and consolidates information on the SADI program, which is Strategic Aerospace and Defense Initiative, which is in fact good news, and good news for all Canadians. Just a few questions. If I may, does Industry Canada have an action plan to respond to this audit? And if it does, has the action plan begun? And could you maybe elaborate on what progress has been made?
And I'll actually probably ask Mr. Wheeler to address that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At this point in time, what we have is the Department's responses to each of the 7 recommendations we make in the audit report. We were happy that in their responses, the Department has set specific timelines and made specific commitments for actions to take. However, at this point in time, we have not yet seen an overall action plan which would set out in more explicit detail how the Department plans to fully implement our recommendations and when. We understand that as per a PACP decision back in 2010 that the Department is to be tabling to the committee an action plan within 90 days of the tabling of this report.
Okay, thank you for that. And I wonder, sir, could you give us some sense of the purpose of this SADI program, Strategic Aerospace and Defense Initiative, possibly what its impact in terms of the size of the investments in research and development that it's able to leverage?
Mr. Chair, the government perceives SADI to be a very important government program designed to encourage research and development in the area of aerospace and defense. And one of the indicators it uses to assess its success is the number of dollars, private sector dollars, that are leveraged as per SADI dollars. At this point in time, the Department has not yet reported on that indicator. We're hoping that as the Department continues to monitor the success of the program and, more importantly, evaluate the program in 2016-17, that information will be provided.
Okay, fair enough. Well, with regard to SADI, can you give me some sense as to how it ranks relative to previous programs like TPC and DIPP or any of those programs?
Mr. Chair, one of the issues that we looked at in our audit was whether the department fully evaluated the predecessor to SADI, which was the Technology Partnerships Canada program. We were happy to see that a midterm evaluation was done, which looked at issues with respect to program effectiveness, but we were disappointed that a final evaluation was not done. So, as we stated in the chapter, we feel that the department missed an opportunity to improve program implementation and program evaluation with respect to SADI. However, we were happy to see that in SADI the department has taken steps to establish service standards, and they've taken steps to also improve their information management systems to better administer the program. In both of those areas, work is ongoing, however.
Okay. So I guess we're on the right track. What is Industry Canada doing to follow up the recommendations to ensure future contribution agreements it signs with recipients specify project-specific objectives and identify anticipated outcomes and benefits that are aligned with the SADI program initiatives?
Mr. Chair, as we note in the chapter, for the period 2007 to 2010, that was not well done. We were happy to see in the last 7 agreements that were signed that project objectives were more clearly set out, and anticipated outcomes and benefits were also more explicitly stated. And we were also happy to see that the department is committed to, as it goes forward and signs additional agreements with recipients under SADI, that it is committed to continue making that improvement and ensuring that contribution agreements very clearly set out project objectives and anticipated outcomes and benefits.
Okay.
Time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we'll move to Mr. Allen, who now has the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Auditor General. If I could, Auditor General, take you back to Chapter 3 and in Section 3.20, you've identified some funding of $780-odd million that has been allocated since 2001 through 2011, and as you was to address some different things. And what you say in the report, sir, is that the $780 million, which part of that went to cybersecurity? And as I read through this report, it says, and I'll quote, "Therefore, we were unable to determine how much of the $780 million was specifically allocated to activities for the protection of critical infrastructure from cyber threats." And so it seems to me, I mean, that's a fair amount of money. In fact, it's a large sum of money, $780 million, albeit wasn't all to be allocated, I believe the report is trying to tell us, for a specific cyber threat. Might have to do with some other infrastructure pieces around, when it comes to Public Safety Canada and et cetera, et cetera. And so when you go to 321, the last part of it is that Public Safety Canada officials were able to inform you that they had spent $20.9 million of the remaining $210 million was directed towards cyber protection for critical infrastructure between 2001 and 2011, which, if my math is right, is about $2 million a year over 10 years. And so I know enough not to ask you a judgment question, sir, whether that's an appropriate amount or not. Of course, I wouldn't ask that question. But clearly, it seems to me it's disquieting for me not to be able to follow where did the money go. And we're still, for the department, unable to tell you, sir, where the money went in the sense of cybersecurity, whether it went to other departments, they couldn't answer that. How much they really spent, they didn't really know that. Is that a fair sense of what is being told to me here?
As the chapter is explaining, what we wanted to do was we wanted to try to identify how much money was set aside for cybersecurity. However, it was
just one of a set of objectives in funding envelopes. So we weren't able to identify specifically how much had been set aside for the cybersecurity initiatives, and therefore weren't able to tie it into, there was this amount of money, these are the things that are intended to be achieved with that, and then have they been achieved or not. But that was a function of the way that the money had been originally approved. It just was not specifically identified as being this amount of money for cybersecurity issues.
And I can agree that, funding envelope can come with different tags to it. Let's do this and let's do that. But one would think that a department would be able to report to you, well, actually, we accomplished this and this is what we spent on it. One would hope they could tell us that. But I know time, we only have the 5 minutes. So I want to actually go to 332, where it talks about 10 sectors or networks that have actual sector risk profiles. And I know the government is saying, well, we're progressing in the last 2 years. This is actually talking about 11 years after we first committed to undertake a partnership to strengthen our critical infrastructure protections. And according to this, all 10 networks have sector risk profiles and lead departments identified, but 6 did not include representatives from all the industry groups that Public Safety Canada identified as key stakeholders. We also noted that while most have met, only 5 have included cybersecurity in their discussions, and yet these sectors, if you will, or networks, if you will, and it's explained what they exactly are. I don't have enough time to tell the public exactly what those are. It seems to me that the plan is not very far along. I mean, we've got 6 who haven't really got the folks who should be there. We've got 5 that don't even talk about cybersecurity. I mean, is it reasonable to expect that we really need to push this along a bit?
Certainly that was the point in raising this issue, was that these are important components of making sure that the federal government's playing its role in terms of helping protect critical infrastructure from cyber threats. And these sector networks need to be well established, and they need to be talking about the potential of cyber threats.
And the last bit, because I know time is tight, is this issue of having the agency open 24/7, as you call it, CCA-IRC. I noticed in the recommendation, the response from the department is they didn't agree. You had suggested 24/7. They've come back and said 15/7. Is that a fair articulation of they've decided not to follow your advice of 24/7 and go to 15/7?
Mr. Ferguson, if you would.
I think all I can say is certainly to this moment, all I know is that they've decided to go to 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. We indicated that we felt 24/7 was, what the agency was intended to do, and that one way or another, it's critical that there be round-the-clock ability to collect information about these types of threats and analyze it, and then tell the people who need to know that information, and that needs to happen one way or another on a round-the-clock basis.
Very good. Thank you very much. Moving along, Mr. Storcis, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Auditor General, for coming today. I appreciate your reports. I guess I have a couple questions for you, beginning on Chapter 7. The first one is actually more of a statement. According to your analysis, as well as the Department of Finance's findings, the Government of Canada's finances are on a solid, sustainable, long-term footing. Would you agree with that statement?
What we did was we put in the chapter a graph of if you extrapolate the budget out over the long term, then there appears to be a trend towards improving fiscal situation. But again, understanding that those types of extrapolations are just that, they're extrapolations, they're not predictions.
And nobody's going to hold you to it at this point in time. The other question I have for you is in recommendation 7.57, where the recommendation is the Department of Finance should publish the long-term fiscal sustainability analysis for the federal government and provide from time to time analysis for all governments combined. I think myself and the department agrees with your statement in regards to the Government of Canada. I think that it is important to see what the fiscal sustainability long-term is for the provinces as well. But seeing that's not our purview, have you entertained the thought of perhaps writing the provinces yourself on this and getting the information from the various provincial governments and territorial governments?
We made the comment related to the provinces because we think that's something that from time to time the federal government should do, collect that information. Of course, it requires cooperation from the provinces as well, but we felt that that really was something that the federal government should do, not necessarily every year, but you know, on a fairly regular basis to make sure that there is a fuller picture of the fiscal situation, not just of the federal government, but of the federal government and the provinces and territories combined.
Sorry, what would you anticipate a fairly regular basis to be?
I could see something like every 3 years or so.
Okay. And what would that recommendation be based on for?
It's simply a matter of the fiscal situation of the provinces is also an important part of the big picture of fiscal sustainability for the whole country. I'm saying 3 years. It could be 4 years. It could be 2 years. You have to have a starting point somewhere, which is why I'm saying 3 years.
Okay. I'd actually like to move on to Chapter 4. You talked about the OSI clinics with my colleague. You mentioned you had visited 2 clinics. Would you be able to say which 2 clinics you visited and why they were the choice for your selection?
I don't have that information with me.
Perhaps you could, through the chair, table that for the committee. I guess my next question would be in regards to the IPSC clinics that you visited as well. If we could get that information as well. I do have IPSC clinics as well as an OSI clinic in my riding, so it's something that's very interesting to me. In your review of the processes between the Department of National Defense case managers, did you take a look at the workflow or the turnover between when a veteran or soon-to-be released veteran goes from the Department of National Defense to the Veterans Affairs case manager and how that flow goes?
The handoff, I guess, wasn't sort of a specific item of inquiry for us. But what we did was we looked at how case management happens for these people while they are still members of the Canadian Forces, and then how case management happens for people once they are in Veterans Affairs. Now, we did identify also, though, in the chapter some specific situations, for example, the handoff of medical information from one to the other. We also identified that there were some issues with data in some of the information systems. The data wasn't complete.
But, sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off. I only have 5 minutes. My question is in regard to the actual handoff, because that's where there is potential for confusion, certainly from a service member's point of view, going from one case manager to another case manager. Could I ask you, when you looked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, did you take into account the transformation initiatives, the things like streamlining, simpler letters that are being written rather than the kind of complicated language that used to be in place, the less paperwork? I know in my area, one of the big improvements that has been seen is for something as simple as putting in for mileage, not having to submit, Google Maps every time. And some of these things have made it a lot easier on veterans. I was just wondering if you guys looked at the transformation initiatives as well in your investigation.
We looked at the whole process as it was at the time that we were doing the audit. And we identified that there were still issues around how people access. For example, you mentioned language. We did a language assessment of a number of pieces of information, and we found that sort of the language used in some of the explanations and information for veterans was still too complex and needed to be improved. So, we identified that there were things going on, but in general, there were still those types of obstacles that still made it hard for people to access those programs. And sort of back to my previous response, I just want to make clear that what I was trying to get to was in that handover, it's important for there to be consistent information in databases about these people from one side, like from the Canadian Forces, to the Veterans Affairs, so that there is accurate information about these individuals, and that would help make that handoff more efficient.
The time has expired. Over to Mr. Byrne. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Just following up on my questions earlier, the Office of the Chief Actuary provides actuarial advice for the Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security Program, Canada Student Loan Program, and for other public sector pension plans and benefit plans. Mr. Ferguson, the Office of the Chief Actuary is part of the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. And the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions reports to the Minister of Finance, and it's actually housed in the Department of Finance. I appreciate that there may be some machinery of government issues why you may not have actually audited or included in the audit specifically the Office of the Chief Actuary or the Office of Superintendent of Financial Institutions, but clearly it is housed within the Department of Finance. And it just seems to me that this is an incredible wealth of information. If I'm projecting your message to Parliament in your 7th chapter, it is that we can do better. We can provide more credible, more responsible information for parliamentarians and Canadians in the decision-making process by having that information available to Parliament before decisions are taken. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the message that you projected to me. It would seem to me that if you've got an organization like the Office of the Chief Actuary, which is housed in the Department of Finance, which you audited, you'd want to include that and that type of information as to whether or not that's being disseminated to Canadians and to Parliament in a timely way. Was that a consideration at all? I know that Ms. Chang was part of the audit team, was the lead principal on that. Maybe she might want to address it, or you yourself.
Again, what we looked at in the audit was, number one, whether the Department of Finance itself did the adequate analysis on individual budget measures. And when they do that analysis, they would have to gather sort of information from various different sources. We identified that on individual items that they are doing an adequate analysis. The issue that we raised that was not happening was making public on a timely basis, or making public the information about, when you put all of that together, what does the long-term fiscal situation of the country look like. So on an individual basis, the analysis was being done, but the recommendation is about the global picture.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. The issue that I flag is that this information is actually being collected in various measures through the Office of the Chief Actuary, through the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, which is housed within the Department of Finance. And those agencies are actually mandated to make their information public. They're not doing it on a timely basis, and it appears to me that that's an opportunity for us, not a problem. It's an opportunity for us to utilize that in a far more effective way. I'll also note that the range, when I queried this particular issue about how the Chief Actuary does their assessments, the range, when they projected to 2030, the Office of the Chief Actuary actually has a range. It has a best estimate, but it has a range of costs that by 2030, the OAS program could be as low as $70 billion in cost and as high as $140 billion in cost. The way you refine that is to use multivariate analysis as opposed to single-variate analysis, and to really to use resources to actually get a better scoping down of the unknown. Do you think that's a sensible approach, and should Finance Canada take more of an initiative in getting better data with a better range or better limits of what their estimates might be?
Again, Mr. Chair, I mean, all I can really speak to is the audit that we did and the information that we gathered, which was
on an issue-by-issue basis, again, was back to whether the department itself, the Department of Finance, was doing an adequate analysis on each of those individual issues, and we found that in fact they were doing that. So they would have been gathering the information they needed in order to make those types of assessments. You know, again, I can't speak to sort of what's going on in different areas or how they are doing their analysis, because we just didn't audit that.
What appears to be then is that if you've got the Office of the Chief Actuary, which has a staff, it has resources, it's spending money, it's doing analysis, it's a stovepipe that's operating independently from the Department of Finance. It's operating independently from Parliament, because when the Office of the Chief Actuary doesn't actually even table their analysis of these important initiatives until after it's passed into law, we're missing something. We're missing a valuable opportunity to you know, for decision making. Then you have the Department of Finance, which is doing its own analysis. I hope that they're actually utilizing the Office of the Chief Actuary when they do that. But even the Office of the Chief Actuary has admitted, through a question that I posed to them, that they actually do a fairly rudimentary analysis of long-term fiscal planning, of actuarial work related to the OAS in particular, that the range that they are came to by 2030, OAS could cost Canadian taxpayers, $70 billion. It could, which in other words means there's no problem within fiscal sustainability, or it could actually cost as high as $140 billion. Their best estimate is that with the changes as a result of C-38 is that it'll be around $90 billion. But would it be advisable, as you who tabled this report about getting this right, getting fiscal sustainability right, would it be advisable to do a sharper, more precise analysis and report that to Parliament?
I hate to do that to you on a complicated question, but if you could keep it as tight as possible, Mr. Ferguson, I'm minding the clock. Thank you. Okay.
And my response, I guess, again, would be that the Department of Finance uses economic models to do these types of analysis, and they collect the data that they need within that economic model to make their determination of what the long-term cost is going to be. And we didn't raise any concerns about the type of modeling that they were using.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes, you have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, and welcome to our guests. My focus is going to be on Chapter 4. And that was an extremely comprehensive audit, and the recommendations made were excellent. I think there were 13 overall, and every recommendation was accepted, and in fact with a definitive timeline and a fairly comprehensive response. So, I mean, I actually enjoyed reading that report. And, you know, you're covering national defense, Canadian forces, some of the Veterans Affairs, so very, very, very complex. How long did this audit take in terms of a time frame or number of hours?
In elapsed time, I guess it was about an 18-month audit.
Oh, well, that's extremely significant. So you had a lot of interaction, obviously, with Veterans Affairs Canada. And, you know, based on that interaction, you know, do you have confidence that they will, in fact, act upon the recommendations that you have made? And I know that's a judgment call, but you had an opportunity to spend a lot of time, and you've seen their responses to your recommendations.
I think, Mr. Chair, all I can say on that is we were happy with the cooperation we got from everybody involved in the audit. Our recommendations have been accepted. So to that point, we are satisfied with sort of the relationship and the responses, but I guess we'll have to wait and see whether the recommendations are implemented.
Thank you. One area of the report kind of jumped out at me, and it spoke to case plans. And in fact, some of the case plans, I think there was 11% of them didn't even end up having a case plan, 11% of the participants. And I'm trying to understand a little bit about what exactly a case plan is, what information it contains, and, you know, based on that, if you can give me, outline, you know, why the department might not have had a case plan for these 11% of the cases you reviewed.
So, for example, in paragraph 4.34,
you know, we say some of the things that case managers do. They assess the member's health needs and reassess them when required, develop and monitor the case plan. And then, in fact, in terms of Veterans Affairs, we indicate that there were 10 components of case plans that need to be in place, and there's a chart in Exhibit 4.5, just after paragraph 4.51, that indicates the various things that would be in the Veterans Affairs case plans for individual members. In terms of why some people were not getting the case plans, I mean, that sort of was just, that was the fundamental finding of the audit, was that there were situations where case plans should be in place, and they were not being, they weren't being put in place, and that's the thing that needs to be improved in the whole process.
I would think that you must have, or the department must have given you some understanding as to why the case plan wasn't put in place. I mean, clearly it wasn't, but I expect there must have been some reasoning as to why some of these didn't happen.
That it's certainly, I don't have you know, any details, more details to give you on that at this point. But it was what we found when we were looking at, you know, what situations require case plans, okay. Were they happening or were they not?
Okay. Based on your entire review, can you speak to some of the positive things you found and give you know, some context as to whether the department as a whole is, in your opinion, fulfilling its mandate?
I think you know, the positives for me are probably number one, we got good cooperation from both organizations. We did feel that both organizations are taking the situation, taking the issue seriously, and know that it needs to be dealt with. There are, as we listed in the chapter, there are a number of programs and services available to veterans. But fundamentally, the issue now is making sure that the obstacles that are still in the way of the veterans getting the services that they need when they need it, that those things get removed so that the processes can be improved and these folks can get the services they need.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And over to Mr. Harris, who I understand will share his time with Madame Blanchette-Lamothe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And given we're sharing the time, I'd ask that the response be as brief as possible. I just want to reflect back on the real property in Defense Chapter 5. We know that the Department of Defense has many assets, but they also have a very big budget, and there's a targeted amount for repair. You've talked about in your opening statement the weaknesses in the government's approach, that in their management of real property, that it could jeopardize the Canadian Force's ability to carry out its missions, which I find to be a serious concern. You've also indicated in your report that the failure to have a completed strategy, framework and development plan means that the department can't know if they have the required real property assets at the right place, right time, to meet the operational requirements. And you've also said that the operational failure and risks to health and safety are present because the maintenance practices are inadequate. The department, some bases didn't have the money available to them to even address identified problems with health and safety, particularly the fire codes. That seems to me to be a problem regardless of the size or age of your assets if you have a targeted budget and you don't spend it. Am I right in characterizing it that way?
The issue that we identified was that the way that they are managing and trying to deal with these assets does not allow them to get done what needs to be done in a timely manner.
And increasing the health and safety risks, particularly when it comes to fire code and other aspects of life safety that real property deterioration can lead to.
Well, we did identify that in terms of needing to deal with those fire safety issues, that those are health and safety issues for members of the forces.
Thank you.
Merci.
Mr. Ferguson, why did you recommend to the Department of Finance to produce from time to time an analysis with respect to all public administrations, including the provinces and the territories? What exactly would be the reason for such an analysis and to make all this so public?
That analysis is because again, if you want to look at it from the point of view of there's one taxpayer, whether they're paying provincial or federal taxes. So as an individual taxpayer, you want to know what's the fiscal situation, not just of the federal government, but also of the provinces as well.
Merci. Je pense que la pertinence est là.
Thank you. I think that that's quite clear to us, and that's the reason for the timeliness. But the government is very clear that they don't intend to follow them, and there's no measure to be taken to ask them to abide by this. We see in your report that the Department of Finance had information with respect to the health transfer. They knew what the impact would be on the provincial budgets and didn't communicate this information. I know that you can't make a comment on that specifically at this point, but the impression I have from all of this is that a government is hiding errors. It's because it doesn't want to be criticized. They had the information as to repercussions on provinces, and the information was never published. And it's unfortunate that the department is not going to abide by that decision, and I don't think there's much more to add. It's always easy to say that the recommendation is accepted, but we see that in accepting the recommendation, only part of the recommendation was accepted and not the entire recommendation. Do you agree with that, that the recommendation does not seem to have been accepted in its entirety in the answer given by the department?
The department did say in the response that they're not accountable for the fiscal situation of the provinces and the territories, so therefore the department will publish the long-term analysis for the federal government on an annual basis. We made the recommendation that from time to time the analysis should include all levels of government, and that continues to be our recommendation, and we would hope that that the department would choose in the future to make fuller information available, including the impact on the provinces.
Very good. Thank you, sir. And over to Mr. Dreeshen, who has the short stick, but you have 2 minutes, sir. Yes.
I don't want you to bang the gavel and call this meeting adjourned at exactly 1 o'clock without deciding the issue of whether or not we're going to ask the Office of the Auditor General if he would return, if we as a committee would decide whether or not we will ask him to return.
Yeah, I got to tell you, we're only going to be short by 2 or 3 minutes, and it's the government that's going to be short. So I'm going to deem that we go ahead and conclude with Mr. Dreeshen, and that's, in my opinion, a full, sufficient hearing. Mr. Dreeshen.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate your concern. But certainly the purpose of this meeting is to hear the information that you have on all of the various chapters that you've presented to us, and we will then be taking a look at it and deciding what is important to our committee. And certainly, I suppose from that particular point of view, the only chapter that we haven't looked at yet is Chapter 1. So I'd like to talk about that. I have served on Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, and I was also a hospital board chair for a number of years. So I have a special interest in those particular areas, and certainly on the topic of professional service contractors. So I'm just in the part of the chapter that looks at integrating human resource planning, you indicated that Health Canada is in the process of implementing an information system to collect and summarize data on employees and contractors. I was just wondering if you could comment on how the full implementation of such a system would improve human resource planning in that department.
I guess sort of trying to be brief, and in general, any system that allows an organization to collect information about the types of human resources that it needs, and then how it can fulfill those needs, whether it be through employees or contractors, would help manage resources from an overall perspective.
Well, and I think the other point is that the report of the First Nations and the Inuit Health Branch of Health Canada is doing some good work with respect to the planning of contractors in healthcare services and primarily in the nursing area. And so also they're doing analysis for the need for contracts just at a project or a program level, and also looking at the level of the branch itself. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on the effect that might be if other Health Canada branches or even departments were to adopt the practices that they are using when they're considering contractors.
I think I'd just go back to our overall recommendations in the chapter, which is about all departments and organizations need to manage these resources as a group rather than individually.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dreesen. Appreciate your cooperation. And go ahead. Is it on the time issue?
Mr. Chair, am I to understand that you will not accept my motion
Here's my thinking. We're down to like the last 30 seconds. Hang on. We've got 30 seconds left. This is an oversight body. We are short by 3 minutes on the rotation, and the 3 minutes are short on the government side. Had it been the opposition, I would have entertained your motion. But given the fact it's the government and it's the opposition that this committee really exists for, I think that we've met the full obligation that we have to the opposition members to allow them to question the Auditor General. I don't think we should get into a long, protracted debate about whether or not we're going to hold another meeting for the sake of 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes that's coming off the government side. So, no, I'm not going to accept your point of order, sir. This meeting is already past the allotted time. I must give our thanks to Mr. Ferguson and his delegation, and to advise colleagues, we now stand adjourned.